They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, but in truth, there was nothing poor about what they would become. In the winter of 1119, amid the stone ruins and blood-soaked sands of Jerusalem, 9 knights gathered in silence. Their armor was worn, their swords dull, but their eyes burned with a purpose that would reshape the medieval world. Led by a man named Hugus de Payons, they swore an oath before the Patriarch of Jerusalem: poverty, chastity, obedience, and, above all, protection of pilgrims on their journey to the Holy Land. They were not crusaders seeking conquest. They were guardians, vowing to defend the weak and die for the faith. King Baldwin II saw in them something rare: discipline without ambition, devotion without reward. As a gesture of faith, he gave them quarters within his palace, built upon the ruins of the ancient Temple of Solomon. It was from those stones, heavy with forgotten history, that they took their name: the Knights of the Temple, the Templars. What began as 9 humble knights would grow into a brotherhood feared and revered by kings and popes alike. At first, they lived as monks. They slept on stone, shared one horse between 2 men, and prayed before every battle. But whispers began to spread across Jerusalem that beneath the Temple Mount, the Templars had found something. Some said it was relics of Solomon himself. Others claimed they had uncovered the Holy Grail, or texts that spoke of powers forbidden to men. The truth was never revealed, but from the shadows of that temple, the Order's influence began to spread like fire through dry grass. By 1129, the Knights Templar had gained the recognition of the Church. Pope Honorius II blessed them, and the great Abbot Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most powerful men in Christendom, became their advocate. Bernard wrote that the Templars were new knights for a new age, men who fought not for glory, but for God's justice. It was divine approval, and divine approval in the Middle Ages meant unlimited power. Donations began to pour in from nobles and kings. Lands, castles, silver, even entire villages were handed to the Templars. They built fortresses across Europe and the Holy Land, monstrous structures of stone that seemed to rise straight from the will of God. They wore white, mantles marked with the Red Cross, the symbol of martyrdom and blood, and their presence struck both awe and terror in all who saw them. When the Templar banner was raised in battle, entire armies broke ranks. Believing angels fought beside them, but while they fought for Christ, they learned the value of gold. As the wars dragged on and the pilgrim routes grew longer, the Templars created something unheard of: a system of credit. A pilgrim could deposit gold in Paris, receive a coded letter, and withdraw his wealth safely in Jerusalem. What began as convenience soon became power. The Templars became the first international bankers in history. Their network of commanderies and treasuries spanned from London to Acre. Kings trusted them more than their own treasuries. They moved armies, funded crusades, and financed monarchs drowning in debt. They built ships, traded spices, lent money to princes, and guarded secrets known only to their highest ranks. In less than a century, these poor soldiers of Christ had become an empire within empires, bound not by borders, but by oaths. But every rise calls forth envy. Every power breeds fear. By the late 13th century, the Crusades had crumbled. The Holy Land was lost. Acre, the Templars' last stronghold, fell in 1291. The blood of their brothers soaked the stones of the city, and the survivors returned to Europe weary, battle-scarred, but still immensely wealthy. While the Church lamented the loss of Jerusalem, The Templars seemed to grow only stronger. They had estates in France, England, Spain, Portugal, Italy, each one protected by papal decree. Their members answered to no king, no lord, only to the Pope himself. They owned fleets of ships that vanished into the Mediterranean, returning with gold, silk, and rumors of forbidden knowledge from the East. In every city, their red cross stood as a symbol of faith and a reminder of power unchecked. Among Europe's monarchs, none feared them more than Philip IV of France. Known as Philip the Fair, he was handsome, calculating, and dangerously ambitious. His wars with England and Flanders had drained his treasury, leaving France on the brink of bankruptcy. And so, like every desperate ruler before him, Philip turned his gaze toward those who had what he desired, the wealth of the Templars. At first, he tried diplomacy. He sought to borrow vast sums from the order, and they lent it politely, but with interest. The King of France was now a debtor to monks with swords. That humiliation festered in him like a wound. He began to see the Templars not as holy warriors, but as rivals, a secret state within his own. And so he began to plan their ruin. Philip found an ally in a man, far more dangerous, his own puppet, Pope Clement V, though seated in Avignon, not Rome. Clement owed his throne to the French crown. When Philip whispered poison about the Templars' heresy, corruption, blasphemy, the Pope listened. He could not openly defy the order, but he could be silent when the king struck. By the early 1300s, rumors spread through France like a plague. The Templars were said to worship idols, to spit upon the cross, to deny Christ in secret rituals. Some said they practiced dark arts learned from the East, that their initiation rites were twisted and unholy. The accusations were absurd, yet they worked. In an age ruled by faith, the mere suggestion of heresy was death. On the night of Thursday, October 12, 1307, the bells of Paris fell silent. The city slept under a cold moon. But beneath the quiet, the king's men moved through the streets like shadows. Letters sealed with royal wax had already been sent across France, each containing the same command to be opened at dawn. When the sun rose on Friday the 13th, the world of the Knights Templar ended. Before the day was done, hundreds of knights had been arrested. Their commanderies were seized, their treasures confiscated. Hugues de Paynes's proud order was accused of the unthinkable, of betraying Christ himself. Torture followed. Men who had ridden through fire and blood for the cross were bound, burned and broken, until they confessed to lies their tormentors demanded. And yet, even in chains, many refused to break. They held to their vows. They denied the charges. They declared that God would judge their persecutors. The streets of Paris filled with whispers. Some said the Templars had cursed the king and the Pope, vowing vengeance from beyond the grave. Others claimed that their treasures, the relics of the Temple of Solomon, had vanished days before the arrests, spirited away on the order's ships into the mist. But on that morning, as the doors of their fortresses were smashed open and the symbols of the Red Cross torn from their walls, one thing was clear: the brotherhood that had once ruled from the shadows of empires now faced its final reckoning. And yet, there was something strange about their fall. The arrests were too precise, too coordinated, as if planned long before. The Pope pretended surprise, yet issued no order to protect them. Philip claimed divine guidance, yet his debt to the order was wiped clean in a single day. Coincidence or design? The answer lay not in the streets of Paris, but in what the Templars had found long ago beneath the Temple of Solomon. Whatever secret they had carried from Jerusalem, whether sacred or profane, it was something worth killing for, as the fires of persecution began to rise, and the cries of tortured knights echoed through France. One truth became undeniable: the Templars had built their empire on faith, but they would lose it to fear. And fear, as history has always shown, is the sharpest weapon of all. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Mar, still believed that justice would prevail. He sent letters to the Pope, pleading for a fair hearing. But what he did not know was that the Church itself was already complicit in his destruction. The same altar at which his brothers once prayed had become their executioner's stage. As night fell again over Paris, the city seemed restless, as though it could sense what was coming. The wind carried the faint toll of church bells, a requiem for an order already condemned, and so the stage was set. The fire had not yet been lit, but the wood was already piled high. The Templars, once the sword of God, were about to be consumed by the flames of kings. And in that fire would die not just men, but an entire age of faith. The dawn after the arrests came cold and grey. Paris awoke not to birdsong, but to the sound of hooves and iron from every commandery of the Knights Templar. Men were dragged through the streets in chains, their white mantles torn, their crosses ripped away. The people watched in silence. Some spat, others crossed themselves. The most devout wept. For 2 centuries these men had fought, prayed, and bled for Christendom. Now they were called heretics. In the great halls of the temple in Paris, the king's inquisitors prepared their instruments: wheels, racks, irons, and ropes. The air smelled of sweat and fear. The Templars were brought in, one by one, questioned, accused, broken. "Do you deny Christ?" they asked. "Do you spit upon the cross?" And when the answers displeased them, the pain began. For many, it was unbearable. Bones cracked, flesh burned. Some confessed whatever their torturers wished, just to end the agony. They signed papers they could not read. They whispered lies between screams, and thus the truth was buried under the weight of suffering. But not all bent. Some knights, even under the torment of fire and blade, refused to deny their order. One man, Brother Geoffrey de Gonneville, shouted through bloodied lips, "We are innocent. God knows it, and he will judge you all." His words were silenced by iron, but others heard. The confessions extracted in the dungeons were brought before the papal envoys as proof. Pope Clement V, bound by fear of Philip's wrath, accepted them. In official decrees, he declared the order of the temple suspended, not guilty, but too corrupted to continue. It was a coward's compromise. The Pope sought to save himself, and in doing so, he delivered the Templars to their executioners. Philip, however, wanted more than dissolution. He wanted vengeance and gold. He ordered every Templar property in France seized by the crown. Their lands, their treasuries, their horses, even their sacred relics, all taken. And yet, when the king's men opened the vaults of the temple in Paris, they found them empty. Not a single coin, not a single artifact remained. The treasure of the Templars' centuries of accumulated wealth had vanished. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said a small fleet of Templar ships had sailed from La Rochelle days before the arrests, vanishing into the Atlantic under cover of night. Others whispered they had carried relics so powerful the church dared not speak their names. The truth was never found. But the legend would never die. While Philip filled his coffers with stolen land, the Templars filled his prisons with corpses. Dozens perished in the weeks that followed, their bodies left unburied, their names stricken from history. And yet the spirit of the order would not die quietly. Across Europe, kings hesitated to follow France's example. In England, in Portugal, in Aragon, rulers delayed or defied the purge. Even the common people began to murmur. Perhaps the knights were innocent after all. By 1310, Philip feared what he could not destroy with fire. He demanded a final demonstration, a public trial, where the confessions of the knights would be read aloud and their guilt made undeniable. But as the day approached, the plan began to unravel. When the parchment scrolls of confession were brought before the court, several knights stood and shouted that their signatures had been forged, their words twisted by torture. They demanded to be heard. One by one, they recanted their false confessions, proclaiming their innocence and their faith. The hall erupted in chaos. For Philip, it was intolerable. Truth was not what he wanted, only obedience. He ordered the recanting knights burned alive that same evening. Witnesses said the firelight reflected off the Templars' armor as they stood bound together, heads lifted to the heavens. One of them cried out through the smoke, "God knows our innocence." Another shouted, "You burn us now, but one day God shall judge the liars." The flames consumed them, and Paris cheered. But beneath the cheering was fear. Fear of what had been done, and fear of what would come. 3 years passed. The Order of the Temple was dissolved across Christendom. Its remaining members were scattered, imprisoned, or forced into other monastic orders. Only one figure still carried the soul of the Templars, their Grand Master, Jacques de Moore. He was an old man by then, nearly 70, but his eyes still burned with the fire of a crusader. For 7 years he had languished in a dungeon, his body wasted, his beard grown long and grey. Yet he would not confess. He waited, patient and silent, for a trial that never truly came. On March 18th, 1314, Jacques de Moore was led from his cell to the steps of the Isle de la Cite in Paris. The air was cold, the sky heavy with ash-grey clouds. Before him stood a wooden platform and 2 stakes, surrounded by a crowd hungry for spectacle. Beside him was another Templar leader, Geoffroy de Charny. A priest offered them absolution if they would confess one last time. Both refused. "We are guilty only of being faithful," de Moore said, his voice trembling but clear. "I die innocent. Let the truth be known in heaven, and let the guilty tremble on earth." As the executioners bound him to the stake, the crowd fell silent. De Moore lifted his head to the sky. The flames were lit, and the fire climbed around him, turning his white robe to ash. Witnesses swore they heard his voice through the roar of the blaze. "Pope Clement, King Philip, before this year is out, I summon you both to the judgment of God." The onlookers shuddered. The fire burned for hours, until nothing remained but charred bone and dust. But the prophecy, if prophecy it was, did not die with him. Within a month, Pope Clement V was dead, consumed by illness. Within the year, King Philip IV collapsed while hunting, struck down suddenly, without warning. Both men died as de Moore had foretold. The people of France whispered that the curse of the Templars had begun. In the decades that followed, the royal bloodline of Philip the Fair withered away. His sons died one by one, without heirs. His kingdom, once mighty, plunged into chaos. The church never fully recovered from the stain of its betrayal. And in the shadows of Europe, stories persisted of knights who rode beneath the moon, their crosses darkened by ash, still guarding treasures no king would ever find. What the Templars carried from the Temple of Solomon remained a mystery. Some said it was knowledge, the true secrets of faith, too dangerous for the Church to bear. Others believed they had uncovered proof that the divine was not what men imagined. Whatever it was, it vanished with them, leaving only whispers and fear. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The name of the Templars was buried beneath myth and rumor, yet their shadow endured in symbols carved into cathedrals, in the secret rites of new brotherhoods, in the quiet corners of Europe where their fortresses still stand. And perhaps that is the true punishment of those who destroyed them. For while kings rot in tombs and popes turn to dust, the Templars remain, not as men, but as an idea born in blood, burned in fire, and carried by centuries of silence. They began as guardians of pilgrims, poor, devout, and fearless. They died as heretics, tortured, betrayed, and defiant. But in the end, their faith outlived their enemies. The world may never know what they found beneath the Temple of Solomon. But perhaps it was not gold, nor relics, nor secret knowledge. Perhaps it was something simpler. The terrible truth that no power, not even that of kings or popes, can silence conviction forever. And so, when the wind howls through the ruins of their old fortresses, and the moonlight falls upon the crumbling crosses carved into stone, some say you can still hear the faint echo of their vow, Non nobis Domini, non nobis, sed nomini tu, da gloria. Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but to your name give the glory. The fire that burned them to ash could not erase their name. It only carved it deeper into the bones of history. This was their end. And like all great endings, it was only the beginning.